You know what makes me absolutely sick to my stomach? When someone spends months, maybe even years, destroying another person's life, ruining their career, manipulating situations to make them suffer, and then suddenly they come crawling back with an apology like that's supposed to make everything okay. Well, that's exactly what happened on Raw this week when Paul Heyman, the special counsel, the wise man, the advocate, the man who has been a thorn in Seth Rollins' side for what feels like an eternity, stood in the middle of that ring and did something that nobody saw coming. He apologized. Paul Heyman actually apologized to Seth Rollins, and if you think that's where this story ends, if you think this is just a simple case of someone admitting they were wrong and moving on, then you haven't been paying attention to professional wrestling and you definitely don't know Paul Heyman. What went down on Raw is so much bigger and so much more complicated than a simple apology, and by the time I'm done breaking this down for you, you're going to be just as furious and conflicted as I am about this whole situation. Make sure you stick around until the end of this video because the implications of what happened between Paul Heyman and Seth Rollins are going to shake WWE to its very foundation, and if you're not subscribed to this channel yet, hit that button right now because we're about to dive deep into one of the most shocking moments in recent Raw history. Let me set the stage for you because context is everything when it comes to understanding why Paul Heyman apologizing to Seth Rollins is such a massive deal. These two men have been at war for years. Not just a professional rivalry, not just a storyline that plays out on television and then everyone goes home and has dinner together. This has been personal, brutal, and absolutely vicious. Paul Heyman, in his role as the special counsel to Roman Reigns and the Bloodline, has been instrumental in making Seth Rollins' life a living hell. Every time Seth got close to achieving something, every time he was on the verge of a major victory, every time he had momentum building, Paul Heyman was there to throw a wrench in the works. Think about all the times Paul Heyman has cost Seth Rollins opportunities. Think about the matches where Heyman's interference or manipulation led to Seth losing when he should have won. Think about the psychological warfare that Heyman has waged against Seth, getting in his head, making him doubt himself, pushing him to the edge of sanity. Paul Heyman is a master manipulator, perhaps the greatest talker in the history of professional wrestling, and he has used every single one of his skills to torture Seth Rollins. His cut promos that have buried Seth's credibility, his orchestrated attacks that have left Seth broken and blooded, his played mind games that would make a psychologist's head spin. And Seth Rollins hasn't exactly been innocent in all of this either. He's fired back at Heyman with everything he's got. He's called him out for being a snake, for being a coward who hides behind bigger men, for being a manipulator who wouldn't last 2 seconds in an actual fight. Seth has tried to get his hands on Heyman on multiple occasions, and each time, Heyman has slithered away like the serpent he is, protected by Roman Reigns or the Usos or whoever else was part of the bloodline at that particular moment. The hatred between these two men has felt real because in a lot of ways, it probably is real. When you have two people who are that good at what they do, who are that invested in their characters, the lines between reality and fiction start to blur. So when Paul Heyman's music hit on Raw this week and he walked out to that ring with a microphone in his hand, everyone assumed we were about to get another vintage Heyman promo. We were expecting him to talk about Roman Reigns, or to hype up the bloodline, or to insult someone, or to do any of the 1,000 things that Paul Heyman normally does when he has a microphone. What we were not expecting, what nobody in that arena or watching at home could have possibly predicted, was for Paul Heyman to call out Seth Rollins and ask him to come to the ring because he had something important to say to him. The crowd went nuts. You could feel the confusion and anticipation in the arena. What could Paul Heyman possibly have to say to Seth Rollins that would require a face-to-face conversation? Was this a trap? Was Heyman setting Seth up for an ambush? Was this going to be another humiliation, another moment where Heyman uses his silver tongue to tear Seth down in front of the world? Everyone was on the edge of their seats, and when Seth Rollins' music finally hit and he made his way to the ring, you could cut the tension with a knife. Seth walked down that ramp with his guard up, and rightfully so. He's been burned by Paul Heyman before. He knows that Heyman is capable of anything, that trusting him is like trusting a scorpion not to sting you. Seth got in the ring and immediately got in Heyman's face, not giving him an inch, not showing any weakness, making it clear that if this was some kind of setup, he was ready to fight his way out of it. And that's when Paul Heyman did something that shocked everyone watching. He took a step back, he lowered his microphone, and he started to speak in a tone that we've rarely heard from him. Not the bombastic advocate voice, not the hype man energy, but something quieter, something that almost sounded sincere. Paul Heyman told Seth Rollins that he was sorry. He said that he had spent years making Seth's life miserable, that he had orchestrated attacks and manipulated situations and done everything in his power to keep Seth down, and that he was wrong for doing it. He said that Seth Rollins is one of the greatest performers in WWE history, that he deserves respect and recognition, and that Heyman had let his loyalty to Roman Reigns and the bloodline blind him to that fact. He said that looking back on everything that had happened between them, he realized that he had crossed lines that shouldn't have been crossed, that he had made things personal when they didn't need to be, and that he wanted to make amends. The crowd didn't know how to react. Some people were cheering because they appreciated the apparent sincerity of the apology. Some people were booing because they thought this was classic Paul Heyman manipulation. Some people were just sitting there in stunned silence trying to process what they were hearing. And Seth Rollins? Seth looked like he wanted to punch Paul Heyman right in the face. You could see the conflict written all over his expression. Part of him wanted to accept the apology, to move past the years of animosity and focus on the future. But another part of him, probably the bigger part, was screaming that this was a trap, that Paul Heyman doesn't just apologize out of the goodness of his heart, that there had to be an angle here. Seth grabbed a microphone and he laid into Paul Heyman. He said that Heyman's words meant nothing, that actions speak louder than words, and that if Heyman really wanted to make amends, he would need to prove it. He brought up specific instances where Heyman had screwed him over, moments that clearly still hurt, wounds that hadn't healed. He talked about opportunities that were stolen from him, championships that should have been his, moments that could have defined his career but were ruined by Heyman's interference. It was raw, it was emotional, and it was one of the best promos Seth Rollins has cut in years because you could tell he wasn't just reading lines, he was speaking from a place of genuine frustration. And Paul Heyman just stood there and took it. He didn't interrupt, he didn't try to defend himself, he just let Seth vent all of that anger and pain. When Seth finally finished, when he had said everything he needed to say, Paul Heyman looked him in the eye and said that he understood why Seth felt that way, that he had every right to be angry, and that Heyman would do whatever it took to prove that this apology was genuine. He said that he knew it would take time to rebuild trust, that he couldn't expect Seth to just forgive and forget, but that he was willing to put in the work if Seth was willing to give him a chance. Now here's where things get really interesting and where my frustration with this whole situation really kicks in. What is Paul Heyman's angle here? Because there's always an angle with Paul Heyman. The man doesn't do anything without multiple layers of motivation and planning. Is this apology genuine? Has Paul Heyman actually had a change of heart and realized that he's been too harsh on Seth Rollins over the years? Or is this all part of some larger scheme, some long-term plan that we can't see yet but will become clear in the coming weeks and months? The timing of this apology is suspicious. It comes at a moment when the bloodline is in chaos, when Roman Reigns' grip on power is slipping, when the empire that Heyman helped build is starting to crumble. Is Heyman jumping ship? Is he trying to align himself with Seth Rollins now because he sees which way the wind is blowing and wants to be on the winning side? Paul Heyman is a survivor, is someone who has managed to stay relevant and influential in professional wrestling for over 3 decades by knowing when to change allegiances and adapt to new situations. Could this apology to Seth Rollins be the first step in Heyman distancing himself from a sinking bloodline ship, or is this even more devious than that? Is Paul Heyman trying to get close to Seth Rollins so that he can destroy him from the inside? Is this a long con where Heyman earns Seth's trust over the coming weeks, gets him to let his guard down, and then stabs him in the back in the most devastating way possible? That would be very much in character for Paul Heyman, who has built his entire career on being the smartest guy in the room, the one who is always thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone else. If Heyman can get Seth to trust him and then betray that trust at a crucial moment, it would be the ultimate psychological victory. The other possibility, and this is one that I find fascinating, is that Paul Heyman is being completely genuine but for selfish reasons. Maybe he recognizes that his association with Roman Reigns and the bloodline has run its course, that there's nothing left for him to accomplish in that role, and he's looking for his next big project. Seth Rollins, despite all the success he's had in WWE, still feels like someone who could benefit from having Paul Heyman in his corner. Imagine Seth Rollins with Paul Heyman as his advocate, cutting promos on his behalf, manipulating situations to his advantage, using all of that cunning and experience to elevate Seth to even greater heights. That would be a formidable combination, possibly even more dangerous than Heyman and Roman Reigns ever were. But can Seth Rollins trust Paul Heyman enough to let that happen? That's the million-dollar question. Seth is smart, he's been in this business long enough to know how things work, and he's been burned before by people he thought he could trust. Taking Paul Heyman at his word would require a leap of faith that Seth might not be willing to make. And honestly, I don't blame him. If I were in Seth's position, I would be extremely skeptical of anything Paul Heyman says or does, no matter how sincere it might seem on the surface. The fan reaction to this segment has been all over the place, which tells you how effective it was. Some fans are excited about the possibility of Paul Heyman and Seth Rollins working together, seeing it as a fresh dynamic that could lead to incredible television. Other fans are convinced this is all a setup and they are waiting for the other shoe to drop. Still others are angry that WWE might be trying to redeem Paul Heyman after years of him being an antagonist, feeling like it undermines everything that's come before. And you know what? All of those reactions are valid because we don't know yet what WWE's endgame is here. What we do know is that this apology has created a situation loaded with potential. Every interaction between Seth Rollins and Paul Heyman from this point forward is going to be scrutinized. Every word, every gesture, every moment is going to be analyzed for hidden meaning. Is Heyman being sincere or is he manipulating? Is Seth really considering accepting the apology or is he playing along to set up his own counter-move? The layers of storytelling that can come from this are extensive, and if WWE handles it correctly, this could be one of the best angles they've done in years. Let me talk about what this means for Seth Rollins' character because I think that's a crucial element that people aren't discussing enough. Seth has been on a journey over the past several years, evolving from the Shield brother to the Authority's golden boy to the Monday Night Messiah to the revolutionary to whatever you want to call his current incarnation. Throughout all of these character changes, one constant has been his resilience, his ability to overcome obstacles and adversaries. Paul Heyman has been one of those adversaries for a long time, a thorn in Seth's side that he couldn't quite remove. So how does Seth respond to Heyman removing himself, to Heyman offering an apology instead of continued antagonism? This is a test of Seth's character in a very real way. Does he take the high road and accept the apology, showing growth and maturity? Does he reject it outright, maintaining his guard and refusing to be manipulated? Does he play along while planning his own move, being just as calculating as Heyman? Each option tells us something different about who Seth Rollins is and what he values. And that's compelling storytelling, the kind of character-driven narrative that wrestling excels at when it's done properly. There's also the question of what this means for the bloodline and Roman Reigns. If Paul Heyman is genuinely distancing himself from Roman, that's a massive shift in WWE's landscape. Heyman has been Roman's special counsel for years, the voice that legitimized Roman's reign of terror, the mouthpiece that made Roman's tribal chief character work so effectively. Without Heyman, does Roman's character suffer? Can Roman cut promos at the level necessary to maintain his position at the top of the card without Heyman there to do the heavy lifting? These are important questions that WWE needs to address. And if this is all a ruse, if Heyman is still secretly working with Roman to take down Seth Rollins, what does that say about Roman's character? It would suggest that Roman is so threatened by Seth that he needs to resort to elaborate psychological warfare rather than just beating him in a straight fight. That could be an interesting direction for Roman's character, showing a more desperate and calculating side, but it could also make him look weak if not handled carefully. The ripple effects of this Heyman apology extend far beyond just the relationship between Heyman and Seth. Let's talk about the promo itself from a technical standpoint because Paul Heyman is a master of his craft and analyzing how he delivered this apology is fascinating. Heyman is known for his bombastic delivery, his ability to command attention and build to crescendos that leave crowds hanging on every word. But in this apology to Seth, he stripped a lot of that away. He was quieter, more measured, more seemingly vulnerable than we usually see him. That's a deliberate choice, a way of signaling to the audience that this is different from his usual shtick, that we should pay attention because something significant is happening. The word choice was important too. Heyman didn't make excuses, he didn't try to justify his past actions, he simply acknowledged that he had done things to hurt Seth Rollins and said he was sorry for it. That's more effective than if he had tried to explain away his behavior or minimize it. By taking full responsibility, even if it's all an act, Heyman makes the apology feel more substantial, more meaningful. It's the kind of apology that's harder to dismiss outright because it doesn't give you easy ammunition to use against it. Seth's response was equally well crafted. He didn't immediately accept or reject the apology, he sat in that uncomfortable middle space of skepticism and open consideration. He expressed his anger and hurt, which was necessary for the audience to understand the weight of what Heyman has put him through, but he also didn't completely close the door on the possibility of reconciliation. That leaves the door open for this story to develop in multiple directions, which is exactly what you want in an ongoing narrative. The crowd's reaction throughout the segment told the story of how effectively this was all being executed. You could hear the gasps when Heyman first said he was sorry, the buzz of conversation as people tried to figure out what was happening, the mixed reactions as the segment progressed with some people buying into it and others remaining skeptical. That kind of varied audience response is actually ideal because it means different viewers are emotionally invested in different outcomes. Some people want to see Seth and Heyman work together, others want to see Seth reject Heyman and get revenge, and still others want to see Heyman's manipulation succeed. When you've got an audience divided like that, you've created must-see television because everyone wants to tune in to see which direction the story goes. Now let me address something that's been frustrating me about some of the discourse I've seen online regarding this segment. There are people saying that this apology ruins Paul Heyman's character, that it makes him soft, that it undermines years of him being a ruthless advocate who will do anything to advance his client's interests. I completely disagree with that take. First of all, we don't know if this apology is genuine or not, so declaring that it ruins Heyman's character is premature. But even if it is genuine, even if Heyman has had a legitimate change of heart, that doesn't ruin his character, it evolves it. Characters who never change, who never grow, who never have moments of reflection or different perspectives, those are boring characters. Real people are complex and contradictory, and the best fictional characters reflect that complexity. Paul Heyman has been in professional wrestling for over 30 years. Is it really so unbelievable that he might reach a point where he looks back on some of the things he's done and questions them? Is it impossible to imagine that someone who has been as successful as Heyman might start thinking about legacy and how he'll be remembered? I'm not saying that's definitely what's happening here, but it's a plausible character motivation that doesn't require us to throw out everything we know about who Paul Heyman is. People contain multitudes, and allowing Paul Heyman to have layers beyond just being a manipulative advocate makes him a more interesting character, not a lesser one. What really gets me fired up about this whole situation is the potential that's being created here and the fear that WWE might not follow through on it properly. This is the kind of storyline that could be talked about for years if they stick the landing. A genuine reconciliation between Paul Heyman and Seth Rollins that leads to an unlikely but powerful alliance could be amazing. A long-term manipulation where Heyman earns Seth's trust only to destroy him could be equally compelling. Even a scenario where Seth turns the tables and uses Heyman's apparent vulnerability against him could be great. But if WWE drops this storyline, if they forget about it or resolve it in some unsatisfying way, it'll be another example of wasted potential, and I'm sick of seeing great setups lead to mediocre payoffs. The next few weeks are crucial. WWE needs to follow up on this segment consistently and meaningfully. We need to see continued interactions between Seth Rollins and Paul Heyman that build on what happened during this apology. We need to see Seth's internal struggle as he decides whether to trust Heyman or not. We need to see Heyman's actions either supporting or contradicting his words. The story needs to breathe and develop naturally, not just be mentioned occasionally when it's convenient. This can't be something that happens one week and then gets ignored until it's time for the next beat in the story. It needs to be woven into the fabric of Raw's programming going forward. There's also the question of how other wrestlers on the roster react to this potential alliance or reconciliation. If Seth Rollins and Paul Heyman start working together, how do guys like Drew McIntyre, Damian Priest, or Finn Balor react? Do they warn Seth that he's making a mistake? Do they see it as a strategic move that makes Seth more dangerous? The roster's response to this development can add additional layers to the story and create new conflicts and alliances that keep things fresh and interesting. And what about Roman Reigns? Even if he and Heyman are secretly still working together, there needs to be some acknowledgement of this apology from Roman's side. Does he feel betrayed that his special counsel is apologizing to one of his greatest rivals? Does he understand that it's all part of the plan? Is he angry that Heyman is even giving Seth Rollins the time of day? Roman's reaction, or lack thereof, will tell us a lot about where this story is heading and whether there's more going on beneath the surface than what we're seeing. I keep coming back to the fundamental question of trust because that's really what this whole angle is about. Can Seth Rollins trust Paul Heyman? Should he trust Paul Heyman? What would it take for Heyman to prove that his apology is genuine? These are questions without easy answers, and that's what makes this compelling. Trust is something that's built over time through consistent actions, not just words. So if Heyman really wants Seth to believe him, he's going to need to put his money where his mouth is. He's going to need to do things that benefit Seth, even when it costs Heyman something. He's going to need to demonstrate loyalty in moments when it would be easier to betray. Conversely, if this is all a manipulation, Heyman is going to need to be incredibly patient and careful. He can't slip up and reveal his true intentions too early. He needs to commit to the bit fully, earning Seth's trust incrementally until the moment is right to strike. That requires a level of discipline and planning that not every character can pull off, but Paul Heyman has shown throughout his career that he's capable of exactly that kind of long-term scheming. The beauty of this storyline is that it works either way. Whether the apology is genuine or fake, whether Seth accepts it or rejects it, whether this leads to an alliance or to an even more bitter rivalry, there are compelling stories to be told. That's the hallmark of good wrestling storytelling, creating situations where multiple outcomes are possible and all of them are interesting. WWE has set the table perfectly here, now they just need to serve the meal. Let me also address the elephant in the room, which is that some people think wrestling storylines shouldn't involve apologies and reconciliation because it's supposed to be about conflict and fighting. I think that's a limited view of what wrestling can be. Yes, wrestling is fundamentally about conflict, but the best stories throughout human history have involved forgiveness, redemption, betrayal of trust, and complex moral questions. Wrestling can and should explore those themes because they resonate with audiences on a deep level. We've all been in situations where we've had to decide whether to forgive someone who hurt us. We've all wondered if someone's apology was sincere or manipulative. These are universal human experiences, and tapping into them makes wrestling more relatable and emotionally engaging. The Paul Heyman apology to Seth Rollins segment on Raw was shocking not just because it was unexpected, but because it opens up so many storytelling possibilities. It takes two characters who have been locked in a seemingly endless cycle of animosity and suggests that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Whether that suggestion turns out to be genuine or just another layer of manipulation remains to be seen, but the journey to finding out is going to be appointment television. This is the kind of storyline that makes you want to tune into Raw every single week because you don't want to miss the next development, the next conversation, the next piece of the puzzle falling into place. As we move forward from this moment, every wrestling fan should be paying close attention to how this unfolds. This is potentially a career-defining storyline for both Seth Rollins and Paul Heyman. For Seth, it's an opportunity to show growth and dimension as a character, to demonstrate that he's more than just a great wrestler but also someone who can navigate complex emotional and political situations. For Heyman, it's a chance to add new layers to a character that could have become stale after so many years but instead continues to evolve and surprise us. If WWE gives this story the time and attention it deserves, if they resist the urge to rush to a conclusion or drop it when something shinier comes along, this could be one of the best angles in recent memory. But I remain cautiously optimistic rather than fully optimistic because WWE has a track record of starting strong and finishing weak. They've done it countless times before where they hook us with an intriguing premise and then don't follow through in a satisfying way. I desperately hope that doesn't happen here. I hope that whoever is writing this story understands the goldmine they are sitting on and treats it with the care and attention it deserves. The pieces are in place, the performers are more than capable of delivering, and the audience is invested. Now it's just a matter of execution. Make sure you're following this channel because we're going to be breaking down every single development in this storyline as it happens. When Paul Heyman and Seth Rollins have their next interaction, we'll analyze every word and gesture. When the truth about Heyman's intentions is finally revealed, we'll be here to discuss the implications. This is the kind of wrestling story that demands ongoing analysis and discussion, and we're going to provide that for you every step of the way. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and get ready for what could be one of the wildest rides in WWE programming.